Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're putting on our medical detective hats to decode the structured, step-by-step process of the respiratory clinical examination. Let's just dive right in. If you've ever gone through a physical exam and wondered exactly what all that precise tapping, looking, and listening is actually uncovering, well, you are in the perfect place.
So think about it. What is a clinician actually looking for when they're examining your chest? It might surprise you, but when they walk up to the bed, they aren't just looking at your lungs. They're hunting for clues across your entire body to solve a medical mystery. It's a true systemic check, observing exactly how the lungs are interacting with the rest of the patient's physiology.
To crack the case efficiently, medical professionals rely on really strict protocols, often known as OSCE checklists. Think of this as a literal roadmap that structurally organizes the search from head to toe. It ensures absolutely nothing is missed, no matter how small or subtle the clue might seem.
Here's our agenda for today. We'll start with the initial clues, move up to the face and neck, and then hit the core sequence, inspecting, palpating, percussing, and auscultating before we finally complete the exam.
All right, Section 1, the initial clues. We're starting right from the foot of the bed. The very first step is setting the stage. The patient should be positioned comfortably at a 45-degree angle with their chest completely exposed. Now, why exactly 45 degrees? Because this posture allows us to instantly spot any signs of respiratory distress. We can see if they're breathing comfortably at rest or if they're being forced to use accessory breathing muscles, like their neck and shoulder muscles, just to draw air in. We're also checking their general state. Do they look unwell? Are there inhalers or oxygen masks nearby? These are literally the first breadcrumbs on our trail. Next up, we examine the hands and arms. We're checking the pulse, looking for tar staining, and assessing for tremors. And it's super interesting because we're comparing two very different types of tremors here. A fine tremor over outstretched fingers might simply indicate they use asthma medication, like a salbutamol inhaler. But we're also on the lookout for a flapping tremor, which points to something far, far more severe.
This flapping tremor actually has a medical name, asterixis. To test for it, we ask the patient to hold their hands out and cock their wrists back. If their hands begin to involuntarily flap, wow, that is a vital red flag. It tells our medical detective that the lungs are failing to clear carbon dioxide from the blood, a condition known as CO2 retention, which often happens in severe respiratory failure.
Moving right along to Section 2, examining the face and neck. This is where we find some really critical secondary clues. Just by inspecting the eyes, we might reveal a surprising lung connection called Horner syndrome. It's a triad of signs: ptosis, which is drooping eyelids, miosis, or small constricted pupils, and anhidrosis, which is a lack of sweating on one side of the face. This matters because it can be caused when a tumor in the very top apex of the lung, like a Pankos tumor, literally presses up against the thoracic nerve chain. Moving slightly down to the neck, we gently palpate the trachea, right there in the sternal notch. We're feeling to see if it's perfectly central. If that trachea is deviated, it acts almost like a compass needle. It might be pulled towards a collapsed lung where volume's been lost, or it could be pushed away from a massive buildup of fluid or trapped air in the chest cavity, like a tension pneumothorax.
Okay, Section 3, inspecting and palpating the chest. We are beginning the core framework here.
We kick things off by just visually looking at the chest wall for striking deformities. Pectus carinatum is a forward protrusion of the sternum and ribs, sometimes called a pigeon chest. On the flip side, pectus excavatum features a deep hollowness or funnel shape over the lower sternum. We also assess the general shape. A normal chest is elliptical, but a chest with a 1-to-1 front-to-back ratio, what we'd call a barrel chest, is a classic sign of hyperinflated lungs, which you often see in COPD.
After we look, we touch. Palpating the test lets us actually test expansion. The examiner places their hands firmly on the lower chest, anchors their fingers, and leaves their thumbs free-floating in the middle. When the patient takes a big, deep breath in, those thumbs should move apart symmetrically by about 5 to 8 centimeters. If they don't, or if one side moves less than the other, it indicates restricted lung capacity on that affected side, which could be due to a lung collapse, fluid, or fibrosis.
That brings us to Section 4, the art of percussion. Time to physically map out lung density.
This technique is just fascinating. By placing your non-dominant middle finger firmly flat between the ribs and striking it sharply with the fingers of your dominant hand, you send a diagnostic sound wave straight through the chest wall. We map this out across specific sites on both the front and back of the chest, constantly comparing the left side to the right side to catch any differences.
And those sounds, they directly translate to a diagnosis. A normal, air-filled lung sounds resonant. But if the lung collapses and excess air fills up that cavity, a pneumothorax, it becomes hyperresonant, sounding hollow, almost like an empty drum. On the other hand, if the lung tissue is filled with infection and fluid known as consolidation, that percussion note becomes distinctly dull. And if there's fluid sitting just outside the lung in the pleural space, it yields a very specific, stony, dull thud. Now for Section 5, auscultation and added sounds. Time to grab the stethoscope.
We listen really closely as the patient breathes deeply in and out through their mouth. So what are we listening for? Primarily, we want to hear normal vesicular breath sounds. That's a soft, smooth, rustling sound where the intake of breath sounds longer than the exhale. But we might hear bronchial breathing, which is loud, high-pitched, and hollow, often meaning the lung tissue has become solid. We're also hunting for added red flags, like continuous, musical wheezes that suggest narrowed airways, or short, explosive bubbling sounds called crackles that point to fluid or fibrosis in the tiny air sacs.
While we have the stethoscope on the chest, we also test vocal resonance. We'll ask the patient to say the number 99 repeatedly. Fun fact, this tradition actually stems from a deep, vibrational German word, 99. Normally, the sound should be muffled through air-filled lungs, but if the spoken word sounds abnormally loud and clear through the stethoscope, it is a massive clue. The big takeaway here is that solid tissue, like a lung consolidated by pneumonia, transmits sound vibrations much, much better than air does.
Finally, Section 6, completing the examination. Let's look at the last diagnostic steps.
To fully satisfy the clinical checklist, the examiner first has to thank the patient and ensure they're comfortable. Honestly, a good bedside manner is non-negotiable. But a physical exam is really just the first piece of the puzzle, leading us to request further, objective medical investigations based on the clues we've just uncovered.
These vital next steps are what will definitively close the case. We might order a chest X-ray to visually confirm the fluid or the hyperinflation we percussed earlier. We can analyze arterial blood gases to check exact oxygen and carbon dioxide levels, send off a sputum sample to identify a specific infection, or even perform spirometry and peak flow tests to measure the exact functional capacity of those airways.
We've literally gone from the tips of the fingers all the way down to the depths of the lung fields. So the next time a clinician places a stethoscope on your back or asks you to repeat 99, you're going to know exactly what hidden clues they are trying to uncover in this incredible clinical detective story. It's not just a routine. It's a highly targeted, systematic search for answers. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Until next time, keep your curiosity sharp.